images, no distractions, just rain or fire sounds, and a story. This narration is designed to help you relax, drift, or disappear into the dark. If you're still awake, comment below. What country are you listening from? And is this your bedtime? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future nights like this. The hallway stretched ahead of me like a throat. I was already inside. It'd been in Waverly Hills Sanatorium for 3 hours by then, long enough for the late October cold to seep through my jacket and into my bones. The air smelled like wet concrete and old copper. I'd come here to film evidence for my documentary on abandoned asylums. But what I found in the 4th floor isolation ward didn't make it into the final cut because I couldn't explain it. Not then, not now. The floor beneath my boots was covered in a fine layer of black dust that stuck to my soles like wet ash. I'd read the history TB patients, experimental treatments, suicides, but the files never mentioned the sounds. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I realized the building had no windows in this section. The noise came from somewhere deeper, lower, like a heartbeat in the foundation. I checked my phone. 3:15 a.m. My cameraman, Derek, had left 7 minutes earlier saying he needed a cigarette. He never came back. That's when I noticed the temperature had dropped. Not a gradual chilla, sudden, sharp cold that made my breath fog in front of me. I stood up from the stairs, my knees popping in the silence, and called his name. No answer. The red emergency light above me flickered, and for a split second, I saw something, a shape, human-sized, pressed against the far wall of the stairwell. Then the light steadied, and nothing was there. I told myself it was fatigue. I'd been awake for 30 hours, driving from Louisville after a 2-hour nap. But the rational part of my brain was already losing its grip. I started walking down, 1 flight, 2. The door to the 5th floor was chained shut with a padlock that looked new. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Lexington, Kentucky, editing footage from a different shootin' abandoned train station in Richmond. My name is Maya Chen. I am 28, a freelance documentary filmmaker with a small YouTube following and a stubborn streak that borders on self-destructive. I don't let things go. That's how I ended up at Waverly Hills. A viewer had emailed me a link to an old hospital staff photograph from 1928, claiming there was a ghost in the background. I investigated it for a video, found nothing supernatural, but the history hooked me. The sanatorium was built on a hillside in Louisville, Kentucky, and operated from 1910 to 1961. It treated thousands of tuberculosis patients many of whom died there. The building became notorious for its so-called body shootia tunnel, used to discreetly remove corpses. I decided to make a full documentary, funded by my small Patreon. I didn't tell anyone. I was planning a nighttime solo shoot. The morning before I left, I called my mother in San Francisco. She asked why I couldn't make documentaries about something cheerful, like farmers markets. I laughed and said ghosts were more popular. She didn't laugh back. Be careful, Maya. Places like that hold onto things. I dismissed it as old country superstition. My family is Taiwanese. My grandmother believed in hungry ghosts and wandering spirits. I grew up hearing stories about ancestors returning to unfinished business, but I was a rational personer. I thought I was. I packed my gear: a Sony camera, a directional microphone, 3 flashlights, extra batteries, a thermal imaging device Id borrowed from a friend, and a voice recorder. I drove from Lexington to Louisville in 3 hours, checked into a Motel 6 near the airport, then drove to Waverly Hills at 11 p.m. The property is fenced now, but there are gaps. I slipped through one near the old maintenance shed. Inside, the first floor was a maze of patient wards. Each room held rows of iron bed frames, some still with fragmented mattresses, the fabric rotted and sagging. I set up my camera on a tripod in the main hallway, recording ambient audio. The building groaned, constant lintel expanding, wood settling. I filmed for an hour, narrating in a low whisper, pointing out graffiti and decay. Nothing unusual. Around midnight, I moved upstairs. The second floor had more intact rooms, including a nurse's station with a desk still in place. That's where I found the first thing that didn't belong: a single red apple, perfectly fresh, sitting on the desk as if someone had just placed it there. No mold, no rot. I picked it up. It was cold, almost frozen. I put it back and kept filming. I should have left then, but I told myself it was a prank, maybe a local kid. I didn't consider that the apple had no stem, no sticker, and no smell. The third floor held the tuberculosis wards, where the most contagious patients were kept. The walls were still lined with ceramic tiles, many cracked, some shattered. The air was thicker here, heavy with the smell of stale mildew, and something else, a sweet, floral undertone that didn't fit. I recorded a few minutes of audio, then stopped because I heard a voice. Not a clear word, more like a murmur, the sound of someone speaking in another room. I muted my headphones and stood still. The sound came from the end of the hallway, beyond a door marked contagion, restricted. The door was locked, but the lock was old, and the wood around it was rotten. I pushed, It gave way with a groan. Beyond was a stairwell leading down, not up. I hadn't seen any staircases to the basement on the blueprints it studied. But this one was there, dark, the steps descending into absolute black. I shone my flashlight down. The beam hit a landing about 20 feet below, then curved out of sight. I should have called it a night. I had hours of usable footage, and the unknown stairwell was exactly the kind of thing that gets filmmakers killed in every cautionary tale. But my stubbornness, that flaw my ex-boyfriend called clinical obsession, pulled me forward. I descended slowly, one step at a time, my boots scraping against concrete. The staircase turned twice, each turn narrower, the ceiling lower. By the time I reached the bottom, I was crouching. The room opened into a basement that wasn't on any map. The floor was dirt, not concrete, and the walls were covered in writing. Hundreds of names, dates, and short phrases scratched into the plaster. Mary R. 1934, forgive me. Edwin T. 1941, they took my lungs. No one leaves. I filmed it all, my heart thudding. That's when my flashlight went dead. Not dimmed. The bulb simply stopped emitting light. I had 2 more in my bag. I pulled one out. It didn't work either. The 3rd was in my backpack. I unzipped the bag, and my fingers touched something wet. I yanked my hand back like it'd been burned. The wetness was cold and slick, and when I finally pulled my hand out and wiped it on my jeans, I could smell it iron. Not a lot, but enough to be unmistakable. My backpack was on the floor. I unzipped it fully, using my phone's screen as a light. Inside, my spare batteries were intact, dry. The wetness was coming from the top flap, from something I hadn't put there. A small cloth bundle, folded, dripping. I didn't open it. I dropped the bag and backed away. The red glow from the stairwell above gave just enough light to see shapes. I saw the wall of names again, and I saw that one of the names was fresh, not carved into plaster, but written in something wet and dark. My name, Maya C. 2024. I stared at it for a long time, my breath shallow. Think about this: if you found your own name written in a basement you weren't supposed to be in, with no way up but a staircase that might not be there when you turn around. What would you do? I forced myself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth. I told myself it was a prank, a very elaborate prank. Someone had gotten into my bag while I was filming, written my name, planted the apple, staged everything. But that explanation required someone following me for hours, through a fenced-off, abandoned asylum, in total darkness, without making a sound. And it didn't explain why the writing was wet, or why my flashlights had failed simultaneously. I grabbed my backpack, leaving the cloth bundle on the floor end, shoved the working batteries into my flashlight. It flickered on, weak but stable. I aimed it at the stairs. They were still there. I climbed fast, not looking back. When I reached the top, the door to the 3rd floor was closed. I pushed it. It didn't move. I pushed harder. I was locked in the stairwell, or the door had sealed itself. The wood it easily broken through earlier was now solid, immovable. I slammed my shoulder into the door 3 times. It didn't budge. The wood felt different, warmer, almost like skin. I stopped touching it. I backed down a few steps and looked up. The stairs continued up, past the 3rd floor landing, to a 4th floor I hadn't visited. I didn't recall seeing a 4th floor on the building's exterior, but the staircase existed, so I climbed. Each step felt longer than the last, the air growing colder, thinner. The walls changed as I ascended. The peeling paint became smooth, then new. The concrete floor became linoleum. By the time I reached the 4th floor landing, the building looked brand new. Clean white walls, fluorescent lights humming overhead, no dust, no decay. A sign on the door read Isolation Ward 4B, authorized personnel only. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, and I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around. No one there. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued measured, slow, like a doctor making rounds. They came from the end of the hall, from beyond a door with a small window. I approached it, my flashlight now unnecessary under the fluorescent glow. I looked through the window. The room inside was a patient ward, but not abandoned. There were beds, neatly made, with crisp white sheets. On one bed, a figure lay covered with a blanket up to its chin. I couldn't see the face, only the outline of a body. The figure moved at a slow, mechanical turn of the head toward the window. I stumbled back. That's when I realized I was no longer in the same year. The calendar on the wall beside the door read November 1956. The building I was in wasn't abandoned. It was operational. I was standing in a functioning tuberculosis sanatorium. 68 years in the past. And something had just seen me through the glass. I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs locked. The door handle turned from the inside, slowly, with a metallic click. I heard breathing on the other side, wet and labored. The sound of lungs filled with fluid. The door swung open. Inside the room, the bed was empty. The sheets were still warm. I could see the indentation of a body, but no one was there. The room smelled of rot and disinfectant in equal measure. On the bedside table sat a photograph in a silver frame. I picked it up. It was a black and white image of a group of nurses standing outside the sanatorium in front of the main entrance. One of them a young woman with dark hair and sharp eyes looked familiar. Too familiar. She had my face, not a resemblance. The exact same features, the same jawline, the same mole above my left eyebrow. I dropped the frame. It shattered, and then the lights went out. I was back in the dark, the cold, the smell of mildew. The pristine hallway vanished. I was standing in the same room, but it was ruined, no crumbling walls, broken floor tiles, a rusted bed frame. The photograph id dropped lay on the floor. The glass still shattered, but the image was gone. The frame was empty. I crouched and touched the backing. It was damp, as if it had been wet for decades. I had to get out. The building felt different, no active, watching. I moved through the 4th floor, down the stairwell, past the 3rd floor door that now opened easily. I descended to the 1st floor, through the main lobby, toward the exit id entered. The front doors were boarded shut. The boards were new, nailed from the inside. I hadn't seen them when I came in. I pulled at a loose plank. It gave way, and I crawled through, falling onto the grass outside. The sky was just beginning to lighten. A pale gray that meant dawn was an hour away. I lay on my back, breathing, my camera still around my neck. I checked the footage, the entire tape, from after I descended that hidden stairwell was static. I drove back to the Motel 6 in a daze, showered, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the nurses face me, face in that photograph. I searched online for Waverly Hills staff photos from the 1950s. There were few, but I found one, a group portrait from 1954. I zoomed in on a nurse in the back row. The resolution was too low to make out details, but I could see her sharp jawline, her dark hair pinned under a cap. I felt a cold certainty that I was looking at myself. That's when I noticed the caption. Nurse Chen, Maternity Ward, 3rd from left. My surname. I had never told anyone I was going to Waverly Hills, but the power had been out for exactly 47 minutes when my Alexa decided to speak. Not the usual chime or the apologetic. I'm having trouble connecting to the internet. It said my name, my full name, the one I never use. Not Emma, not M, but the name on my birth certificate that only my mother ever used. The blue ring on the device was glowing in the complete darkness of my kitchen. A steady pulse like a heartbeat. And I was holding a lit candle from my emergency kit, the flame trembling as my hands shook. I live alone on the 9th floor of the Harrison, an old converted Victorian apartment building in the East Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. I knew for a fact I had unplugged the device before the outage. The wiring in this building is ancient. I always unplug sensitive electronics during storms. But there it was, glowing, and then it spoke again. The voice was not the standard Alexa cadence. It was slower, stretched thin like a recording played at the wrong speed, but correct, perfectly articulate. Emma Vance, the circuit is complete. I didn't sleep that night. When the power restored itself at 2:13 a.m., every light in my apartment turned on simultaneously. The overhead fixtures, the lamps, the bathroom vent, all of them blazed to life at full brightness, and then immediately cut out. The microwave started beeping a code I couldn't read. My laptop screen flashed a single sentence in Notepad before the machine died. You left the circuit open. I pulled the plug on the Alexa. I pulled the plug on every smart device I owned. The smart thermostat, the Wi-Fi router, the Bluetooth speaker, even the charging dock for my toothbrush. I threw them all into a garbage bag and shoved the bag into the hall closet. But the problem wasn't the devices. The problem was what was using them. The problem was the voice. I spent the next hour on my phone, battery draining fast, searching for explanations. Power surges, causing electrical fires in Amazon servers. A prank, a neighbor hacking my unsecured network. But my hands were shaking too hard to type properly, and my stomach was a knot of cold certainty. The voice said the circuit. My mother was an electrician. She taught me everything I know about wiring, and she died in a house fire 12 years ago. A fire caused by faulty wiring. My name is Emma Vance. I'm 28 years old. I work as a freelance electrical engineer, specializing in home automation systems, which means I design the very infrastructure that smart homes run on. I know these systems better than almost anyone. I know their vulnerabilities, their backdoors, their failure points. That's why I live in a building like the Harrisona pre-war structure, with knob and tube wiring that landlords refuse to update. It's a deliberate choice. I don't trust the new grid. I don't trust the cloud dependency. Ironic, isn't it? For someone who builds the future of home connectivity. But I have a flaw. And it's the kind of flaw that horror stories exploit. The kind that makes you stay too long in a situation you should flee from. I can't let a circuit problem go unresolved. I have to trace the short. I have to find the break. When my mother died, her insurance company ruled it a freak accident. A loose wire behind the wall. A spark in the insulation. She was asleep when the smoke alarms failed, but I never believed it was an accident. I spent years going over the case files, the fire marshal's report, the photographs of the gutted house. There was something wrong with the wiring pattern, something deliberate. I told the investigators, but they dismissed me as a grieving daughter, so I became an expert. I learned everything she knew, and then I learned more. The morning after the power outage, I called my landlord, a man named Gerald, who manages 6 buildings in Capitol Hill. He's in his 70s and has the energy of someone who has seen every possible building disaster. I told him about the power surge, the flickering lights, the microwave code. He sighed the long sigh of a man who knows his wiring is held together with hope and electrical tape. I'll send Rico up this afternoon, he said. He'll check the panel. But Rico never came. I waited until 4, then 5, then 6. I called the main office. No answer. I called Gerald's cell. Straight to voicemail. I was about to go down to the lobby when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was a single photograph. It showed the electrical panel in the basement of my building. A massive steel box that controls the entire structure. Someone had opened it. Inside, the wires had been reconnected, not by a professional. The cabling was woven into a pattern that made no sense for residential power distribution. It looked like a schematic for a circuit I had never seen before. A circuit designed to sustain something, and taped to the inside of the panel door was a piece of yellow notepaper. On it, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "Finishing what you started." I went to the basement. I know every horror movie ever made tells you not to go to the basement. But this wasn't fear of a monster. This was a reference to my mother. That handwriting was hers. I'd recognize the way she looped her F's and S's anywhere. She wrote that note before she died, which meant she had been in this building, or someone had the note and planted it. The basement stairs creaked beneath my weight. The wood warped by decades of Seattle moisture. The air was cold and smelled of damp concrete and rust. The electrical panel was exactly as the photograph showed it. The door hung open, the wires protruding in that strange, deliberate weave. I stood there for a long minute, my breath clouding in the chill, and I studied the configuration. It wasn't designed to deliver power to the apartments. It was designed to draw power from them, to siphon. The pattern was a closed-loop feedback system, the kind used in industrial capacitors for energy storage. But it was primitive. Someone had been working on this for a long time, and the work was not finished. The circuit required a final connection, a bridge. I realized with a cold drop in my stomach that the bridge was my apartment, Unit 9A, the note on my laptop last night. You left the circuit open I was the missing piece. I should have called the police. I should have run. Instead, I pulled out my phone and photographed the panel from every angle. Then I sent the images to an old contact, a former professor at UW, who specialized in anomalous electrical phenomena, Dr. Helena Rose. She had consulted on a case in Portland where an entire street's smart home system had been hijacked by a single compromised node. She replied within minutes, "Where did you get these photos?" I told her. She called me immediately. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the tremor underneath. "That's not a standard feedback loop," she said. "That's a resonance circuit, the kind used in paranormal investigation equipment to amplify electromagnetic fields. But it's scaled, massively scaled. Whoever built that wants to create a sustained field, a stable one. It would anchor something in physical space." I asked her what that meant. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "It means someone is trying to build a door, and the power required isn't measured in watts. It's measured in presence, because you're the one who knows the circuit. You're the one who can complete it." I went back to my apartment. I locked the door, deadbolted it, and slid a chair under the handle. It felt pointless, like barricading yourself against a draft. The problem wasn't coming through the door. The problem was already inside the walls. I sat on my couch, staring at the television that was unplugged, the router that was disconnected, the smart speaker that was in a bag in the closet. And still, the apartment felt wrong. The air was heavier. The ambient sound had changed. I could hear a low hum, a vibration just at the edge of hearing, like a transformer station miles away. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. That's when I felt it, a pressure against my eardrums, a subtle change in the air pressure of the room. The hum grew louder, and then I heard the voice again, not from the speakers, from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, a resonance. I waited for you to understand. It was my mother's voice, not the stretched, wrong version from the Alexa. Her actual voice, the way I remembered it from childhood, and completely impossible. I screamed. I screamed until my throat burned. And then I kept screaming because the voice didn't stop. It kept talking, overlapping itself. A chorus of my mother's words, repeating in a loop. The circuit is almost complete. You were always so smart with wires. You learned so fast. Come find me, Emma. I'm right here, in the walls, in the grid. I'm everywhere you connected. I ran to the front door. I wrenched the chair away, pulled back the deadbolt, and threw the door open. The hallway was normal. The lights were on. The carpet was clean. My neighbor, a retired librarian named Mrs. Chen, was standing in her doorway with her cat in her arms, staring at me with wide eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked. I heard screaming. I couldn't speak. I just pointed into my apartment. She looked past me, into the living room, and her expression changed. She didn't see anything. Of course she didn't. The voice was only for me. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at my phone. The screen was off, but the notification light was blinking. I opened it. A new message from the unknown number. This time, a video attachment. I hit play. It was a live stream from the basement. The electrical panel was open, and someone was standing in front of it. Their back to the camera. A woman with the same haircut my mother had before she died. The video froze. The live stream cut out. I tried to call the number back, but it was disconnected. I ran to the window. My apartment faced the street, and from the 9th floor, I could see the entrance to the basement stairwell on the side of the building. The door was closed. The light above it was off. I stood there, phone in hand, rain beginning to streak the glass, and I tried to think rationally. It was a prank. Someone had found my mother's old notes. Someone was using my grief to manipulate me. But the more I tried to rationalize, the more the pieces refused to fit. The wiring pattern, the handwriting, the voice in the walls, and the woman in the video. I knew her posture. I knew the way she stood with her weight on her left leg, her head tilted slightly down. That was my mother. I had watched her stand like that for 18 years. I went back to the closet where I had thrown the smart devices. I pulled out the Alexa. I plugged it in. I didn't say anything. I just waited. The blue ring spun. Then it stabilized, and the voice came through, softer now, almost tender. I knew you would come back. You can't leave a circuit open. That's what I taught you. I whispered, "Mom." The device paused. Then it said, "I'm not your mom. I'm what she left behind. I'm what she built. And I need you to finish the job. Think about this. If you received a message from a dead loved one's voice, would you chase it? Or would you run? Finish what job?" I asked. The Alexa didn't respond with words. Instead, the lights in my apartment dimmed. The hum returned, deeper now, vibrating in my chest cavity. The floorboards began to vibrate. I felt a pull, a physical sensation dragging me toward the center of the living room. Not forceful, but insistent, like a current. I looked down at my feet. The carpet fibers were standing on end, pointing toward the center of the room. Static electricity. Massive static electricity. The Alexa spoke again. "Your mother found something. in the grid, between the lines of power, a place where the current doesn't flow, but thinks. She called it the induction. She was trying to reach it when the fire took her, but she was close, so close. She left the schematic for you. You've been following it your whole life, Emma. Every circuit you designed, every system you built. You've been completing her work without knowing it. The resonance field is almost stable, but it needs a conscious anchor, a living mind inside the loop. I dropped the Alexa. It hit the floor and kept speaking, the voice distorting into a harmonic buzz. You are the final wire, Emma. Step into the circuit. Let the current carry you, and you can see her again. The apartment was coming apart. My books were lifting off the shelves, floating a few inches in the air before dropping. The package was heavier than it looked. I remember that clearly because when he handed it over, the weight pulled my wrist down, and the corner of the box scraped the frame of my front door. The man on my porch smiled, his teeth too white against the evening gloom. 342 Verrott School Road, he said, reading the address off the label, though I hadn't asked. Right number, Ms. Chen, right. I nodded, already reaching for the pen to sign, but he didn't offer the scanner. Instead, he tilted his head and said, Your cat's name is Miso. I saw her in the window last week. Cute little thing. I didn't have a cat. I had never had a cat. The window he pointed to was my bedroom window, second floor, facing the street. I told him I didn't own a cat, and he laughed like id told a joke. My mistake, he said. Probably the neighbors, but I lived in a detached house with no immediate neighbors, just a long stretch of lawn and the woods beyond. He left before I could ask anything else, his van pulling away without headlights. I locked the deadbolt and slid the chain across. Then I stood at the living room window, parting the slats of the blinds, just enough to see the street. No van, no movement, just the oak trees swaying under a bruised purple sky. I told myself it was a mistake, a confused delivery driver who got the wrong address, maybe misread the label. But He said my name. He pointed to my bedroom window, and he'd known about a cat that didn't exist. I carried the package to the kitchen and slid it open with a butter knife. It was a set of copper measuring cups, id ordered from a small Etsy shop in Portland. Nothing out of the ordinary. The shipping label had my name and address, but no reference to any cat. I set the cups on the counter and tried to shake the feeling, but that night I checked every window twice. I turned on every light in the house. I even looked under my bed, something I hadn't done since I was 12. And when I finally lay down, I lay facing the door, waiting for a sound that never came, to understand why this rattled me so deeply. You need to know how I ended up in Lafayette, Louisiana. My name is Maya Chen. I am 32, and I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means I spend 90% of my life inside this house. I moved here 3 months ago, after a breakup that left me hollowed out and desperate for a fresh start. The house on Verrat School Road was cheap because it was old, with drafty windows and a bathroom heater that clicked all night. But it was mine, rented month to month from a landlord it never met. I liked the isolation. The nearest grocery store was a 10-minute drive, and the neighbors were sparse. A few ranch houses scattered along the rural road, their mailboxes rusted and leaning. I had no friends in town yet, no one who would knock on my door unannounced. So when a delivery driver knew the layout of my house, knew which window was mine, knew something as intimate as a pet's name, it never mentioned that wasn't just odd. It was impossible, unless he'd been watching me long before that evening. I am the kind of person who orders almost everything online. Groceries, toiletries, art supplies, cat toys. Despite not owning a cat, all of it appears at my doorstep within 2 days. It'd gotten used to the faces of the regular drivers. The UPS woman who wore a sunflower pin on her vest. The Amazon guy who always left packages behind the planter. But this man was new. I tried to remember his uniform. It was dark, maybe navy, but without any logo I could recall. And his van, had it been a van? I thought it was, but now I couldn't picture any markings on its side. I pulled up my order history and scrolled through recent deliveries. The copper measuring cups were shipped through the United States Postal Service. The tracking number showed delivery by a carrier named First Class Logistics. I'd never heard of them. I searched the name online, but the only result was a page that didn't load. A white screen with a spinning wheel that eventually timed out. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet alarm was beginning to pulse. 2 days later, another delivery. This time it was a plain brown envelope. No return address. Shoved through the mail slot at noon. I wasn't expecting anything. I pulled it open and found a single sheet of printer paper. On it was typed a list. Bedroom, blue lamp on nightstand. Bathroom, lavender soap, towel hanging on the left hook. Kitchen, kettle with a chipped spout. Your mother's maiden name is Miller. I dropped the paper like it was burning. The details were exact. The lamp I'd bought at a thrift store in Baton Rouge. The soap I'd picked specifically for its scent. The kettle with the chipped spout I'd dropped it the first week and never replaced it. And my mother's maiden name. That wasn't something I put in my online profiles. I didn't use it for security questions. I barely remembered it myself. Someone had been inside my house. Not just inside, they had observed, taken notes, cataloged the intimate geography of my life. I ran from room to room, checking locks, windows, cabinets. Nothing was out of place. No sign of entry. But the list was proof. I wasn't safe. I checked every possible hiding spot. Under the sink, inside the closet, behind the water heater. I even pulled the cover off the floor vent in the hallway, shining a flashlight into the dark cavity, half expecting to see a lens staring back. But the list had to come from somewhere. Someone had been in this house while I was out, or while I was asleep. I started locking my bedroom door at night. I placed a chair under the knob. I slept with a pair of scissors on the nightstand. The next morning, I called my landlord using the number on the lease. It went to voicemail. I left a message asking if anyone had been given a key for maintenance. No call back. I called the local police non-emergency line. They took a report over the phone, but without evidence of a break-in. They said there wasn't much they could do. Keep your doors locked, Mom. Call us if you see anything suspicious. That was it. I hung up feeling like id just told a priest a sin he'd already forgotten. The world outside my windows continued, normal and indifferent, but inside the air felt thicker, charged with a presence I couldn't name. That night, I did something I should have done from the start. I went through my digital footprint with surgical precision. Every social media account, every shopping site, every comment id ever left on a forum. I changed all my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication. I even checked the settings on my smart home, devices, the thermostat, the doorbell camera, the voice assistant id bought on a whim. That's when I found it. My doorbell camera had a log of activity from the past week. Most of it was normal. Me leaving, returning, a package delivery from the USPS. But there was a gap, a 5-hour block on Tuesday, 2 days before the list arrived, where the camera simply didn't record. Not a glitch, the log showed a manual disabling event at 2:14 p.m. Someone had opened the app and turned off the camera from inside my house. The only way to do that was to be on my Wi-Fi network or to have physical access to the device. I stared at the log, my thumb hovering over the timestamp. Then I noticed something else. The event was labeled with a device name, Maya's iPhone, but my iPhone was in my purse the entire time I was at the grocery store that afternoon. I checked my location history. I was at the Albertsons on Johnston Street from 2:00 to to 2:45. Someone else had used my phone, or someone had spoofed it. I called the doorbell company's support line. They told me that remote access to the device could only be achieved with the account password or by being connected to the same local network. I asked if there was a way to tell which device had performed the action. The support agent put me on hold for 5 minutes, then came back and said, "Mom, the log indicates the command came from a device named Galaxy S23. That's a Samsung phone. Yours is an iPhone, correct?" I told her yes. She asked if anyone else had my Wi-Fi password. I said no, id never shared it, not even with the landlord. She paused and said, "I'd recommend changing your network password immediately, and maybe consider resetting your smart home devices to factory settings." I thanked her and hung up. I sat there, the laptop warm against my thighs, the house groaning around me the way old houses do. Think about this. If that happened to you, what would you do? Who would you call? The police had already dismissed me. The landlord was unreachable. There was no one else. I was alone with a stranger who knew my mother's maiden name, who had walked through my rooms while I was buying avocados. I changed the Wi-Fi password, factory reset the doorbell, and unplugged every smart device in the house. The voice assistant went into a drawer. The thermostat I set to manual. The doorbell I left offline. I felt like I was cutting my own house off from the world, sealing it into a bubble of analog silence. But that only made the quiet worse. Now every creak, every shift of the foundation, every rustle of leaves outside became a potential intruder. I started sleeping during the day, staying awake through the night with all the lights on. I drank coffee at 3 a.m. and watched the driveway from the living room window. That's when I saw it a faint glow, low to the ground, coming from the edge of the woods. Not headlights, not a flashlight. It was the blue-white light of a phone screen. Someone holding it at waist level, standing among the trees. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The light stayed for what felt like 10 minutes, then vanished. I didn't call the police. I didn't have proof, just a feeling that grew roots in my chest. He was watching, and he wanted me to know. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and bought a chain lock for the inside of the front door, a motion-activated floodlight for the backyard, and a cheap trail camera I could mount on a tree. I spent the afternoon fortifying my home like a soldier in a foxhole. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was trying to protect myself from someone who had already gotten in. The trail camera I placed facing the edge of the woods, angled to catch anyone approaching from the tree line. I set it to record video clips when triggered. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the only light from the screen of my laptop, watching the live feed from the camera. The feed was black and white, grainy, showing a stretch of grass and the jagged silhouette of pine trees. At 2:33 a.m., motion was detected. I leaned forward. The video clip recorded. I played it back. A deer, just a deer, stepping out of the brush, its eyes glowing in the infrared. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But then I replayed the clip a second time, and I noticed something. Just before the deer emerged, in the top right corner of the frame, a shape moved, something low to the ground, crossing from one tree to another. It was too quick to make out. I couldn't tell. I rewound, played frame by frame. On frame 37, there was a pale oval, a face, and then it was gone. The first time Maya saw it, she was rinsing a coffee mug at 3:47 a.m. The kitchen light was off behind her, and the backyard lay silver under a partial moon. She wasn't looking for anything, but something made her glance up. There, at the far end of her new property, just inside the cedar fence line, stood a shape. Not a person exactly, it was too still, too perfectly vertical, like a cutout of darkness against the neighbor's porch light. Maya blinked, rubbed her eyes. The shape didn't move. She told herself it was a garden tool, a forgotten lawn chair draped with a tarp. But Shed walked that fence line yesterday, and there was nothing there. Her hand trembled against the mug. The shape remained, unwavering, as if it were watching her right back. Then a car turned onto S.E. Tenino Street, headlights sweeping across the yard. The shape was gone. Maya stood frozen, the mug growing cold in her hands, the silence pressing in from all sides. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, Maya sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through real estate photos of the house Shed, bought 3 weeks ago, a modest craftsman on S.E. Spokane Street in Portland's Selwood neighborhood. The listing agent had mentioned nothing unusual. The inspection report was clean, but now every shadow seemed heavy. Every creak in the old hardwood made her flinch. At 5:12 a.m., she texted her brother in Seattle. "I think there's someone outside." He replied an hour later, "Probably a raccoon." "You okay?" Maya didn't answer. She pulled up the blinds on the back window and scanned the yard in the gray morning light. The grass was wet with dew. The fence stood intact. No footprints. No sign of anything. She almost laughed at herself. But then she noticed something. The garden shed, planted last weekend, a row of lavender along the fence was flattened, as if something heavy had stood there for a long time. Her heart synced with hum of the refrigerator. Maya Chen was 29, a freelance graphic designer who'd moved from Seattle to Portland. After a breakup, she still couldn't talk about without clenching her jaw. The house on Spokane Street was her first solo purchasea fixer-upper with original woodwork and a yard that needed love. She told herself the move was about space, about quiet, about starting over. Her flaw, the one her ex had been happy to point out, was that she noticed too much. She could spot a misaligned pixel from across a room, read a person's mood from the tilt of their head. It made her good at her job and terrible at relaxing. In the first week, Shed repainted the bedroom, hung curtains, and introduced herself to the neighbor to the right, an elderly man named Harold, who said he'd lived there since 1989. "Y'all like it here," Hidi said, squinting at her over his glasses. "Nothing ever happens." Maya had smiled. Now, 2 nights later, she wondered if nothing was the same as nothing you're supposed to see. By the 3rd night, Maya had convinced herself Shed imagined it. Sleep deprivation, new house jitters, the echo of a stressful month. Shed even laughed about it with her friend Jenna over the phone. "I am becoming one of those people who sees ghosts," Maya said. Jenna laughed. "You need to get laid, not exorcised." So Maya decided to reclaim her normalcy. She made dinner pasta with jarred saucine, watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures. She checked her emails. She texted a client about a logo revision. At 11 p.m., she locked all the doors, set the alarm system Shed had installed after the first sighting, and climbed into bed with a paperback. The alarm system was a new addition, a small concession to her unease. It had motion sensors covering every window and door. If anything moved outside, a chime would sound. She fell asleep to the sound of rain tapping the roof. At 3:47 a.m., the chime went off. Maya sat up, heart hammering. The alarm panel read, "Motion detected, backyard." She didn't move. She only listened. The alarm system had a camera function, a small floodlight with a built-in lens that streamed to her phone. Maya grabbed her phone from the nightstand, fingers slick with sweat. The app loaded. The night vision feed showed the backyard in shades of ghostly green. There was the fence, the flattened lavender, the damp grass, and there, at the exact same spot as before, stood the shape. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, with no visible featureless, just a void against the fence. No arms or legs distinguishable, just a column of black. But what made Maya's blood turn cold was this. The shape appeared to be looking directly at the camera. She could feel it. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. The alarm system had a 2-way speaker, She pressed the talk button. Her voice came out a whisper. No response. The shape didn't move. She pressed again, louder. Who's there? The shape remained still. Then on the screen, it tilted its head a slow, deliberate motion, as if considering her. Maya dropped the phone. She didn't sleep again. She sat in the hallway, back against the wall, watching both the front and back doors. Phone in her hand, with 911 already dialed, but not yet pressed. She couldn't bring herself to call. What would she say? There's a dark shape in my backyard. Shed be the woman who called the police over a shadow. The alarm system showed the backyard clear now. The floodlight had turned on automatically when motion was detected. But by the time Maya looked again, the shape was gone. She considered going outside to check. She didn't. The rest of the night passed in a haze of adrenaline and second-guessing. When dawn came, she forced herself to walk the yard. The ground was wet. The lavender was still flattened. And now there was something new. A single footprint in the mud near the back door. Not a shoe print. It was a bare foot, elongated, with toes that seemed too long. Maya knelt and stared at it. The print was impossibly light as if whatever made it barely touched the ground. She took a photo with her phone. Then she called Harold, the neighbor. Harold came over at 9 a.m., a mug of coffee in his hand, wearing a flannel shirt and a skeptical expression. Maya showed him the footprint. He studied it for a long time, then shrugged. Could be a raccoon or a deer. Does a deer have toes that long? Maya asked. Harold looked at her, then back at the print. No, he said quietly. He straightened up and scanned the backyard. Look, I don't want to alarm you, but you're not the first to mention something weird about this property. Maya's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Harold took a sip of coffee. The couple who owned it before Youthie moved out sudden told me they couldn't sleep. Said they kept seeing a man in the yard at night. I thought they were just jumpy. Did they call the police? Maya asked. They just left. Harold shuffled his feet. I am sure it's nothing. Just some neighborhood kid playing pranks. But keep your doors locked. He walked back to his house without another word. Maya spent the rest of the day online, digging into the history of her house and the Selwood neighborhood. She found property records showing the previous owners, a couple in their 40s. No kids who'd sold at a loss. She searched their names and found nothing unusual. Then she searched Selwood shadow figure and Portland backyard ghost. The results were sparse. A few forum posts from 2015, 2018, 2021, all from people living within a mile radius of her house, describing the same thing. A tall, dark figure seen at night, always in a backyard, always standing perfectly still, always gone by dawn. One user wrote, "It doesn't move until you look away. Then it's closer." Another, "I think it's been here longer than the houses. My grandma used to tell me about the shadow man when she was a girl." Maya felt a chill crawl up her spine. She printed the most detailed accounts and pinned them to her corkboard. Then she looked at the clock. 2:30 p.m. She had about 13 hours until 3:47 a.m. She decided to document it. Maybe it was a persona stalker, a trespasser rant. She could get evidence to give the police. She set up her DSLR on a tripod facing the backyard, connected it to her laptop, and set it to record continuously from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. She also placed motion-activated lights around the fence line. She double-checked the locks. She kept a baseball bat by the bed. At 10:30 p.m., she texted her brother, "I am fine. Just being careful." He replied with a thumbs up. Maya sat in the living room, laptop open, watching the live feed. The backyard was empty. The sky was clear. The moon was waxing. She made tea. She read a book. She waited. At 11:47 p.m., something flickered in the corner of the feed. She leaned in. A branch. A bird. But it was too tall. The shape was baculier than before. She checked the time. 11:47 p.m., not 3:47 a.m. The pattern had changed, and this time, the shape was at the back door, not the fence. Maya's breath stopped. The shape stood at the sliding glass door, no more than 12 feet from where she sat. She could see it clearly on the feed. A tall, featureless darkness, but now with a defined torso and arms. One arm was raised, its hand, if you could call it that, pressed against the glass. The fingers were thin, elongated, almost like spider legs. Maya couldn't move. She couldn't even turn her head to look at the actual door. The camera feed showed the shape's head where its head should be slowly turning, as if it were looking at the lens again. Then, on the feed, its hand began to move. It traced something on the glass. It was writing. Maya forced herself to look up from the laptop, and at the actual sliding door. The door was dark. She saw nothing, but when she looked back at the feed, the shape was gone. She replayed the footage, there clear as day on the glass. A word spelled backward, so it would be read from inside. Think about this: if a shadow you'd only seen in your yard suddenly wrote your name on your door. What would you do? Maya didn't scream. She didn't run. She sat frozen, her mind racing through possibilities. It knew her name. It had come to the door. It had left a message. She replayed the footage 3 times, zooming in on the lettering. The hand had moved with unnatural precision-o hesitation. no smudging. She checked the timestamp. 11:40, 7:12 to 11:40, 7:45. 33 seconds. Then it vanished. Not a walk away, not a fade into shadow. The shape just stopped being there, frame by frame. She checked the front door locks again, then the windows. Everything was closed. She grabbed the baseball bat and sat on the floor, back against the wall, facing both the sliding door and the hallway. She didn't sleep. She watched the footage loop until the sun came up, and then she noticed something shed mist in the terror. The shape had cast no shadow on the glass, no reflection. At 8 a.m., Maya drove to the Portland Police Bureau's East Precinct on SC 106th Avenue. She asked to file a report. She showed the officer, a tired-looking man named. Thank you for spending part of your night with us. If you enjoyed the story, we'd appreciate a comment, a like, and a subscription to the channel. And please share this video with your friends who enjoy calm horror and rain sounds. Rest well and good night.